It's October 20th, 2021 in Toledo, Ohio, and police just got a call from a woman who said her ex-boyfriend is stalking her.
What's his last name?
The night before, she said Larry Jenkins sent her a text message that said he was tracking her location, and this morning she found him sitting outside of her apartment. When she tried to leave, she said Jenkins followed her car, and when she attempted to flee, he purposely rammed into the back of her vehicle with his.
He ran into the back of my car.
Toledo police would arrest Jenkins, which was unusual for him because he's normally the one putting on handcuffs.
Another cop thinks he's above the law.
I think 2 years.
They think they're
Detroit
above the
police
law.
officer Larry Jenkins would be charged with menacing by stalking and criminal damaging. He would later plead no contest to disorderly conduct.
Where is he today?
Still on the job.
Officer Jenkins is
Above the
on
law,
police
sovereign
department
citizen.
in the 3rd Precinct. Yes.
Assistant Chief David LaValle says Jenkins returned to the force after serving a 20-day suspension.
A whole 20
Sarah
days.
Rennie, executive director of the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence, said it's conduct that shouldn't be tolerated from those with a badge.
It's a really dangerous fact pattern. He stalked her.
These cops continue to do whatever they want because of qualified immunity, and they get by with it. There's whole videos on that. They just keep going, and the government just keeps letting them get by with it. The courts overlook it.
He harassed her. He hit her with a car.
Tonight, our investigation reveals that Officer Jenkins is one of more than 150 Detroit police officers to be charged with a crime since
150
2016.
of them.
Many of those officers remain on the force today after being found to have violated the laws they're supposed to enforce.
How'd he hit you?
He punched me.
In January 2019, Clinton Township Police received a domestic violence call from Officer Blake McCullough's wife, who said she'd just been punched with a closed fist.
He punched me dead in my face.
Punch her in the face, you got a big welt on her face.
This isn't the first time.
They do that to innocent people all the time. They attack people all the time and get by with it. There's hundreds of videos of it, thousands of videos on it. And then just think about all the times when there is no video and they get by with it. The courts just overlook it. DAs overlook it and let them go. Agents of the state.
First time he hit me.
Officer McCullough admitted to striking his wife in the face, but said it was an accident. He was placed under arrest.
You're a police officer, you know better, man.
McCullough was charged with domestic violence, one of 18 Detroit officers charged with that crime since 2016. His wife later refused to prosecute, and the case was dropped. McCullough was suspended for 3 days and today works for DPD. Officer Lewis Wilson did plead guilty to domestic violence after being accused of striking his girlfriend in the face. His penalty, a 13-day suspension, but through a provision in the union contract, he only served 3 days and deducted the remaining 10 from his comp time.
I can't believe this, man. These unions just protect these cops. It's like a criminal gang. That's all it is, a criminal gang. They're above the law.
Is there room in this department for cops who strike women?
Yes.
There's not room for people who show a repeated pattern of conduct that would be violent and aggressive.
Oh my God, that's most cops.
There will be leniency.
Well, like I said, we look at each case individually.
The case of Alexander Kucheravi is a violent one. He was charged last year with domestic violence and assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than murder after an argument with his girlfriend. She told Taylor police that Kucheravi began choking her with both hands around her neck, then threw her against the living room coffee table, picked her up again by the throat, lifting her off the floor. She could not breathe, she told police, and felt that she was going to lose consciousness. Police documented red markings and bruising, a small laceration on her nose, and broken nails that were bleeding. She later declined to prosecute, but internally, Kucheravi admitted to grabbing his girlfriend with...
She probably refused to prosecute because she was being threatened by other cops. She was scared for her life. She was terrified.
With both of his hands around her throat and choking her, and destroying her front door. He was given a 10-day suspension, but only served 5.
10 days when
If
he
he stays out
admitted
of
to doing
trouble
it.
for a year, he won't have to serve the rest.
He admitted to strangling her,
Right.
and he served a 5-day suspension.
Correct.
And he's at the 6th precinct today.
Yes.
What sense does that make?
Well, it makes sense that he was involved in this one incident. He has a 1-week period that, again, his pay and benefits will be withheld.
We hold our officers to a higher standard.
No, you don't.
Detroit Police
They
Department's
get held to a
job
lower
make sure that
standard.
the people who are policing the perpetrators aren't perpetrators themselves.
Police officers are held to a higher standard.
This
Liar.
was then Police Chief James Craig suspending Officer Willie Fortner after he was charged with 4 felonies and a misdemeanor. At 2 a.m., surveillance video showed Fortner in Greektown grabbing his girlfriend around the neck and pulling her to his vehicle. A witness later testified she
That
was
sounds like
upset and
kidnapping.
crying, saying, "Get off me, I don't want to go with you," and that he saw
Whoa,
Fortner
that is
punch her.
kidnapping.
When passersby tried to intervene, according to Wayne County's prosecutor, Fortner ran to his vehicle, pulled out a gun from his trunk, and pointed it in their direction.
Holy shit.
Fortner was acquitted of the felonies against him, but found guilty of domestic violence.
We have zero tolerance.
It's on camera and
for officers
acquitted.
engaging in
Ain't that
criminal
some
misconduct.
crap?
What's the department's policy for
Sovereign
domestic violence?
citizens.
Is it 0 tolerance?
It is 0 tolerance, yes.
But Fortner wasn't terminated. Instead, says Assistant Chief David LaValle, he was suspended for 19 days and remains on the force today. Fortner's attorney tells me he denies punching his girlfriend.
How can a guy who commits domestic violence and then pulls a gun on civilians still have a badge today?
You know, officers sometimes become involved in instances of arguments that escalate to a domestic violence situation, and it happened 4 years ago. And our records don't indicate that he has been involved in any other instances since.
How can someone then turn around and protect us if they're willing to engage?
How many incidences of excessive abuse has he been accused of? I bet multiple. But they won't look at that. They just look at the assault on a female, domestic violence. They won't look at the other ones because they know they'd have to get rid of him.
Engage in that kind of behavior.
Sarah Rennie is executive director of the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence.
You have strangulation, attempted kidnapping, pulling her into the car.
Attempted kidnapping, that was kidnapping.
And again, what is DPD saying by encouraging or allowing that person to stay on the force?
Since 2016, 41 Detroit officers have been charged with an assaultive crime, including Officer Artez Williams. In the 6 years he's been on the force, he's been arrested twice after serving a 3-day suspension in 2020 for pushing his girlfriend, then throwing her cell phone across the room. 6 months after that, Williams was arrested by Oak Park police for assaulting his girlfriend's brother. He punched him in the face with a closed fist, according to a police report. Then, after a fight ensued, Williams returned with a firearm pointed at the ground. He pled guilty to assault and battery, serving a 10-day suspension. Less than a year later, Oak Park police were called again by the mother of one of Williams' children, saying she was forcefully pushed from behind by the officer, who then pulled her hair from the front. Charged with domestic assault, he pled down to disorderly person. Still employed by DPD today, he's now under suspension.
Is that an example of 0 tolerance, or is that an example of 3 strikes?
And this goes on in every police department across the USA. Guaranteed.
An example of, well, both. 0 tolerance doesn't necessarily mean that you have to lose your job or be terminated because an incident occurred. It means that we don't tolerate it. And by not tolerating it, we administer a penalty through our discipline process.
That does not sound like 0 tolerance.
It's not 0 tolerance.
Acceptable behavior.
Detroit Police Commissioner Ricardo Moore is supposed to help oversee the department, but says he and his fellow commissioners are usually kept in the dark when officers are arrested and charged.
It's very shocking. I wouldn't have ever imagined there was that many police officers charged with criminal cases.
One of those officers is Robert Crenshaw, arrested in November last year when his wife called Sterling Heights police. After an argument, she said her husband followed her into the bathroom and began to choke her. She told police he put both of his hands around her neck and applied pressure. After letting go, she said Crenshaw grabbed her again with force, then held her over a half wall and threatened to throw her down the staircase. In the police report, the responding officer noted that her entire neck was red while he talked to her, and that the redness did not appear to fade while I was on the scene. Crenshaw pled guilty to domestic violence, but because it's his first offense, Officer Crenshaw will not be terminated, according to Assistant Chief LaValle. The presumptive penalty, a 20-day suspension.
I don't think that one incident necessarily.
Cops kill people when nothing happened to them. So this domestic violence isn't going to stop them. They get by with shit all the time. Sovereign citizens, but they accuse others of sovereign citizens.
Automatically means that you should be excluded or terminated.
Even if it's strangling your wife?
Like I said before, I mean, I think even though strangulation is a very serious conduct, it doesn't always tell the entire picture of what happened.
That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for their victims, and it's not acceptable for our community. Detroit can do better than this. Detroit police can do better than this.
It's July 2018 at Greektown Casino in Detroit. Inside this parking structure, police are responding to a scene that's about to turn violent. But the first punch wasn't thrown by a civilian. It was Sergeant Raytheon Martin, seen wearing the backwards hat.
He said, "It's time for you to get the F on." I'm looking at the officers like, y'all gonna keep letting them attack me? And he kept striking.
Oh, they help.
Sergeant Martin would plead no contest to aggravated assault and willful neglect of duty. Through a deal with the prosecutor, he was required to serve 1 year probation, complete anger management, and not work as a street officer for a full year.
There you go,
He did,
sovereign citizens.
and then returned to the department.
Above the
We're
law.
at a very critical point where communities don't trust law enforcement, and this is one of the reasons why.
Martin's attorney said his client was dealing with unruly patrons who'd been asked to leave the casino, and that he accepted responsibility for his mistakes. Raytheon Martin remained on the force until just this summer, when DPD said his certification as an officer expired.
Why did the department bring him back at all?
Because that's the type of cops they like. They prove
I actually
it
don't
constantly.
have the details of that.
Records show DPD had moved to terminate Martin after he made false statements during the investigation. But Martin appealed and was given one last chance.
The
Of
union.
the 41 Detroit officers charged with assaultive crimes since 2016, at least 2 were accused of hurting children. Officer Robert Brown received a 45-day suspension for hitting his girlfriend's 3-year-old grandson so hard in the face, he left a bruise still visible 4 days later. Brown would tell Macomb County Sheriff's deputies it was discipline that went overboard. The criminal case against him did not proceed, but the department handed down a 1.5-month-long suspension, in part because Brown's disciplinary history is so lengthy, a full page and a half. Most
See?
of it
And
is
he's
hidden
still
from
a cop.
public view because the city keeps discipline older than 4 years a secret.
Child abuse, I cannot tolerate it. I just cannot. I have grandkids. I have kids.
And then there are officers Stephen Hyde and Ronald Cadez, both on duty on a night in October 2017 when they started to follow this silver Pontiac Grand Prix driven by 19-year-old Jerry Bradford. Bradford took off and the officers followed. DPD only allows vehicle chases if a suspect is wanted for a violent felony. Bradford wasn't, but officers chased him anyway at speeds of up to 75 miles per hour. 35 seconds in, Bradford's vehicle crashed. But instead of rendering aid, dashcam shows the officers stopped, turned their overhead lights off, and turned left. They circled for more than 3 minutes, and at one point appeared to push their dash camera straight up. Eventually, officers Hyde and Cadez would pull up to the crash site where Bradford would be pronounced dead.
I can only assume that the officers suspected they'd be in trouble and were trying to cover it up.
Wayne
Yeah, they
County's
were.
prosecutor agreed, charging both officers, who later pleaded no contest to willful neglect of duty. They served no jail time. In disciplinary hearings, Hyde and Cadez pled guilty to 4 departmental charges, including failing to respond to an accident and rendering aid.
They call it a slap on the wrist. I don't even know if this is a slap on the wrist. I mean, I think at the end of the day, they had to pay a $500 fine, and then they put their badge back on, and now maybe you're still out there today.
They left the scene of an accident. They did not render aid immediately.
Right.
How is that not something that would lead officers to be terminated on the spot?
The initial
That
penalty
sucker
that
right there
we
should be
administered was
fired and
termination.
charged for
But
all
the
that
Detroit
cover
Police
up.
Union intervened, arguing that while the officers made mistakes, they should not be terminated. They weren't, and like almost all the officers we've told you about,
So basically
remain
murder.
on the force today.
Their responsibility, their job
A
is
criminal
to
gang.
respond to
It's a
crimes.
proof that it's a
It should
criminal
be
gang.
taken very seriously that there is a list of officers ever growing who are
Criminal
also
gang.
responsible for crimes.
Since being brought back to the department, Officer Cadez has faced departmental charges, including for making an improper traffic stop and accidentally discharging his firearm, where he served a 3-day suspension.
Oh my
He was
God.
recently up for a promotion to sergeant, but we just learned that Chief James White exercised his authority to pass over Cadez, citing his disciplinary history. We did reach out to the Detroit
I'm
Police
surprised they
Officers
didn't make him
Union for comment
lieutenant or
on each of
captain.
the officers we've just told you about. We did not hear back. I'm Ross Jones, 7 Action News.